come to the middle of this series of presentations, the seventh, 6 before and 6 after. We are living in the knife edge of a shift in time forms. The two most dangerous standoffs are happening simultaneously, one nested within the other, as we speak. The standoff that is nested within is between Israel and Iran over nuclear weapons. It is the most dangerous flashpoint on the planet. And what we are going to talk about today shows the paradox that such a conflict standoff of ultimate importance should even exist. The other, which is the context, is between the United States and its position in Afghanistan. And also in the presentation today, we will be able to appreciate how peculiar this is. One of the most startling things about being a doctor of civilization is coming to understand the structure of time as time forms. And for us to appreciate that time as a dimension is easy. To appreciate that space has 3 dimensions is easy. But it is poignantly peculiar to realize that consciousness is also a dimension. It is a 5th dimension to space-time and occupies a peculiar quality. It's like the movable thumb. It makes the other 4 into a hand, into a star. Now, as long as you have a square, you have a symmetry. But when you get to a star, you have a different kind of symmetry. This symmetry of a square has a stability when it is integrated complete, that the symmetry works its way out, and one says then that it's in equilibrium. And in space-time, an equilibrium is indeed by a symmetry balance. When you add consciousness as a dimension, so that you have 5 dimensions, that 5-dimensional symmetry is not based on equanimity and balance. It's based on a symmetry of radial balance. And that radial balance we speak of as having a chirality. And chirality always occurs in a pair. It's chiral clockwise or it's chiral anti-clockwise. And as long as both motions are in play together, as long as they are tuned together, then a radial symmetry maintains not its symmetrical integral balance, but it maintains its differential conscious balancing. So that there is an ancient wisdom way of presenting 2 hands. One is the hand of the symmetry of the clockwise, the other is the hand of the symmetry of the counterclockwise. And when they are brought together, then the radial symmetry of the pair tune what we call spiritually presence. that the fifth dimension has a particular quality of presence, and that presence has resonances through an ecology of phases, of engendering, of emerging, of developing. And it is important for us to understand that this particular time that we are living in, the early 21st century, is a beginning of a whole new series of time forms, and our quintessential five-dimensional conscious space-time is being scrambled because of a peculiar gap and lack. And that gap is specifically acceptance. It sounds peculiar, it sounds new agey, it sounds unlikely, but acceptance is a key to how the integral symmetry, equanimity, is able to extend itself out to the radial symmetry, beginning with a five-dimensional field and emerging out of that a new kind of person. That new kind of person now, instead of needing to be reliant on a pragmatic correlation, which is summed up generally as thought, words, and deeds, all in balance, aligned, in equanimity. That when a spiritual person emerges, they add another dimension. Like consciousness has added a fifth dimension, the spiritual person adds a sixth dimension, and that sixth dimension is that they emerge a prismatic participant who emerges equally out of the infinite possibilities of differential consciousness and the zero nature that founds the whole space-time integral. 500 years BC, it was expressed poignantly by Lao Tzu, and in my translation of the Tao Te Ching, one of the telling sections out of the 81 is section 28. And I've translated the title of that section as Resuming Uncarved. One word is translated in here as the English word indention. And indention is a spontaneous space of acceptance, receiving which one can give a higher order. Now in my 100-plus page outline of the learning civilization, in between the first year, which is the integral cycle, and the second year, which is the conscious ecology, there are 2 pages. The first one is entitled Acceptance. And at the beginning reads in this way: the last stage of integration is surrender. The releasing of resistance to complete effects the actual completion. Now this is symbolized as the clockwise motion that doesn't quite close but turns and goes back the other way. That turning point is not a point, it's a space. And the classical Greek word for that turning is metanoia. Meta means above mind, noia, nous, metanoia. And the way in which it was expressed is that the clockwise motion comes almost full round and then has its metanoia, has its turn, and goes back through the cycle in a different way, in a counterclockwise way, so that you have the balance of the chirality. That double motion together, the Greek word for it was chorea, out of which we get the choreography. It is a dance movement which begins and goes through its whole cycle, but does not complete the motion, but goes back through the cycle the other way. And what occurs is that there is now not an alignment, but that there is a recognition that the space of the turning point is the same space out of which the beginning came, and the same space out of which then the end of that motion goes back into. So that this space before the beginning, at the turning, pivot, and after the end is the space of acceptance. So this is Lao Tzu in my translation, resuming uncarved. Who knows presenced masculine and keeps presenced feminine becomes heaven-earth's tuning fork. Being heaven-earth's tuning fork, eternal Te not left, returns, goes to beginnings. Who knows the white yet keeps the presence of black, becomes heaven-earth's measure. Being heaven-earth's measure, eternal Te not messed, returns, goes to non-selfless. Who knows deep glory and keeps deep humility, becomes heaven-earth indention. Being heaven-earth's indention, eternal Te then intact, goes, returns, uncarved. Being's vessel, spirit gen, utilizing this, then being is our official chief. Therefore, for great handling, don't carve up. The uncarved. As we have been investigating and opening up, Lao Tzu, as the classic wisdom in China at the time, is a part of the radial symmetry, and that radial symmetry for him involved the Tao and the Te, which were a pair that had another pair that came out of them that was emphasized by the other great sage, somewhat younger, about 50 years younger than Lao Tzu, whose name was Confucius, Kongfuzi. They're often shown as polarities, and this is simply a deep ignorance. Lao Tzu talks about Tao Te. Confucius talks about Gen E. The E is the symbols, and the Gen is the human-heartedness. The human-heartedness, the Gen, is the pivoting of the balance of Tao Te, and the E comes out with the Gen then to be a further tuning. And if you look at Confucius's work, the Confucian classics, the number one beginning one is the Analects, the Lun Yu of Confucius, which emphasizes Gen. To find Confucius on the symbols on the E, one has to go to his commentaries on the I Ching. And he wrote 10 commentaries on the I Ching. They're called the 10 wings, because when you have them all together, not only do you have a metta, but you have a para. You have a metta which goes above, but you have a para which goes beyond. The above is still in space-time. The para is beyond space-time into further dimensions. And if you take a look at the I Ching, and of course the I Ching means the book of symbols, and you see the distribution of Confucius's 10 wings, they're spread all the way through like a choreography that it is not meant to be focused upon. It's meant to have a distribution through the chirality both ways. So that when you read in the I Ching, the decisions, the meaning of the symbols, the way of interpretation, the hermeneia, the translation that first found a way to understand this was the Wilhelm Baines translation, H.G. Baines, but Richard Wilhelm, was born in China, the son of missionaries, and grew up understanding Chinese as well as he understood English. It's like in my education, I talk many times about Louis Leakey being born in Africa and growing up in Kenya and speaking Kikuyu equally with English, and didn't know that he dreamed in Kikuyu till he went to England to go away to school, and it suddenly occurred to him that he dreams in Kikuyu, and was a tribal elder, as a matter of fact. He was, in his own words, a white African. In a way, Richard Wilhelm was a white Chinese, and he understood that there is a peculiarity that's going on in the I Ching, because the origin of it back about 3000 BC focused on trigrams, the Ba Gua, which form a set of 8. But the set of 8 is actually, in terms of an integral, is the form of 6. 3 different ways that you can have the trigrams. You can have a line that is unbroken below 2 broken lines. You can have it in the middle, and you can have it on the top. Those are the 3 permutations. And likewise, with the broken line, you can have it on the bottom, in the middle, on the top. It is a universal quality of space-time to have 3 levels. You can have an electron, you can have a muon, you can have a tau particle. Or you can have the positron, you can have its development in its 3rd development. But if you abstract out the essence of what has calibrated in its 3 stages, you will have a 4th stage of having all 3 of the abstracted lines that are unbroken, all 3 of the lines that are broken, and so you get a set of 8. So that the 8 has a peculiar relationship. It is a conscious transform into a differential field, where now the Ba Gua, the set of 8 trigrams, is capable of a prismatic expression. And that prismatic expression took a long time to come. It essentially was that you can take pairs of trigrams and make a hexagram. And that if you go through that, you get the permutation of 8 times 8, you get 64 hexagrams. But about 2,000 years after Fuxi and Nugua, his consort companion, made the trigrams that developed into the hexagrams, a completely new understanding came where Zhen was as important as the original heavenly earth insight, the trigrams of heaven, the trigrams of earth being brought together, that the bridge in between became important. And the Zhou dynasty was founded on the transform, the end of the old time form after 2,000 years and the beginning of a new one, where they were no longer just heavenly constellations and earthly registrations. Now it was in terms of man, the family of man. This is the eldest brother, this is the middle brother, this is the youngest brother. This is the eldest daughter, this is the middle daughter, this is the youngest daughter. And the mother and the father are the essence of that family. And so you had a humane structure that came into play prismatically and changed the way that the I Ching was, and now it was called the Zhou Yi, the symbols of the Zhou dynasty. And right at the end of the Zhou dynasty is when Lao Tzu and Confucius came in. They came into play staggered in such a way that it was only 300 years later that China came into being for the first time. Instead of all of the old kingdoms, all of the old dynasties, you had a sudden generation. Qin Shi Huang Ti said, everyone is of my empire family. You are all Qin's people. You are all now Chinese. This is happening in our time of the establishment of a planetary humanity where we are all terrestrials. Nationalities will not matter. Races will not matter. What will matter is that the planetary stability is in terms of an integral which is unstable. It cannot hold. It cannot be accepted without higher dimensions of ourselves coming into play, which means the ecology of consciousness. That ecology of consciousness opens up when the metta accepts the para. When we forget being above the divisions and we go beyond divisiveness. That is only stable if you have something which is called history, having its own kind of radial double chiral symmetry. The prismatic person who is a 6-dimensional jewel, a crystal that can become a jewel, generates a 7-dimensional flow, which is what history is. And the best way to describe it, I have found over the decades, is to say that history is a kaleidoscopic consciousness. It has a peculiar distillation of the transformation of consciousness. Consciousness, the field of consciousness, is a field of remembering. History, as a kaleidoscopic flow of that, distills remembering into learning. So that without history, we really don't learn. And as we talked last week in the presentation 6, eventually the meta becomes reabsorbed in an enlarged symbolic structure. The integral enlarges itself and no longer experiences that there's something above. We have worked it in. It happens over time. It will always happen over time. And the spiritual person now becomes an ideal of the symbolic structure rather than a prismatic person. It now becomes a very powerful ideal within an integral structure which obviates the differentiality of the spirit and makes it a good idea, makes it a good concept. And in order to ensure that that concept holds, one creates doctrines. As soon as you have an ideal, you have to have an ideology to make sure that this holds. And its referentiality goes back to the rituals, goes back to the things, goes back to the actions. They have to now match up with the protective ideology. You must do the right thing. And in order to do this, we are now going to have codes of behavior. We're going to have laws of interaction, and we're going to have a standardization of the selections of things that are accepted. And there are some things that are not acceptable. There are actions that are illegal and must be punished. There are ways of considering which are against the code and are not approved. In all of this, it takes more energy than to become metta. And so human beings have had to literally grow in their energetic capacity for vision. And it has a cycle to it. And that cycle was apparent about 2,000 years ago in a very, very big way. And what was apparent is best approached. Tacitus was the great historian of the 1st century AD, the greatest Roman historian. He was born about 50 AD. He lived until about 120 AD and was masterful. He wrote several histories. The Annals of Imperial Rome, this is from the Penguin Classic, has a very interesting aspect in the section on the reign of terror of Tiberius Caesar. Towards the end of his life, Tiberius Caesar died early in the year 37 AD, and he literally went berserk in his final years. Tacitus writes about 34 AD in the Annals. Next year, the consuls were Paulus Fabius Priscius and Lucius Vitellius. It was now at the conclusion of an age-long cycle that the phoenix appeared in Egypt, a remarkable event which occasioned much discussion by Egyptian and Greek authorities. I will indicate the facts on which there is agreement and certain others which are doubtful, but not wholly fantastic. The phoenix is sacred to the sun. Those who have depicted it agree that its head and markings of its plumage distinguish it from other birds. Regarding the length of its life, accounts vary. The commonest view favors 500 years. And one can find in Pliny and in several other very upper echelon Roman intellectual famous people the cycle of the phoenix, which puts it back to the time of Pythagoras. And so you get this computing about the 1st century AD in Rome, consulting not only the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Greeks, but books which were called the Sibylline prophecies. The great Roman Sibyl was the Sibyl of Cumae. Cumae is down near Naples, and anyone familiar with that area knows that Vesuvius, a very huge volcano, eventually in 79 AD, destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum. The rock north of Naples is permeated by long lava tunnels. And one of those long lava tunnels was singled out as the approach to the Sibyl of Cumae's sacred cave. And her cave was peculiar because it was like a lava dome that had collapsed, and so it left a very large inner area, but had dozens and dozens of other lava tubes going off it, in such a way that if a human voice were sounded in that cavity, it would echo interminably. And so the injunction was, you must maintain silence in the face of the Sibyl of Cumae. She will speak to you. You cannot speak. You must remain silent. Now that lava tube leading up to her is so ancient that it was sculptured architecturally inside so that it had a series of sides that came up and then angled to a top which was then truncated. In Mayan architecture, it's called the Arch of Lablin. It is also a beehive structure from the Mycenaean architecture, arranged in such a way that the tops came very close to the surface so that they made openings so that light, sunlight, or under full moonlight, would illuminate that lava tube to the Sibyl of Cumae's place. The geographic name of it is the Phrygian Fields. That you would be walking through these special architectural hoops of light, like resonances, leading to her cave, and progressively you would have to accept that this was really happening, and that your silence in face of the Sibyl was the ultimate releasing of any resistance to be holding her. And so the Sibylline books were written down by those who had undergone this, and they were sacred to such an extent that when Augustus Caesar took over the power of the Roman world, he made it a penalty under death for anyone to own or to hold back any pages, any books of the Sibyl. And they were collected from all over the world, wherever they occurred, and they were put in a sacred place in Rome for keeping. And that original place was supposed to be in the Roman Forum, in a temple there, but the original idea that Augustus had was that it was going to be in a temple to eternal peace called the Ara Pacis Augustae, which was where the Via Flaminia came into Rome from the north. And just when it came in through the Flaminian gate, Flamen in Latin means priest. It's the priest's way coming through. And coming along the Via Flaminia, just like the Appian Way from the south, there were huge pines that were planted in pairs so that you had this approach that you were coming into a sacred place of an uncanny resonance, and that it wasn't up to you to decide what to say or what to do. It was up to you to appreciate what was here being said and being done. If you look at archaeologically and architecturally, it's been established. If you look at the place of the Ara Pacis Augusti, and right next to it is the great mausoleum of Augustus Caesar, the founder of the Roman Empire, and you look across the Tiber, not directly across, that's the Ponte Porus. If you look at an angle, you will see the Castle Angelo, the great military fortress, and right behind it, the Vatican, St. Peter's. So that you have an incredible alignment of power in such a way that if you drew a right angle using the Ara Pacis Augusti to the Vatican as the hypotenuse, the line dropping down vertically and horizontally match and focus and become the edge of the field of Mars, where was the Roman Forum. And the extension of the Foro Romanum by the great Emperor Trajan made the Trajan Forum the exact geometric place in Rome where all the power was in a Pythagorean right triangle. About 4 or 5 years ago, the Getty Museum and Foundation completed a decades-long program to re-establish a virtual Foro Trajan's, and I will bring the big several volume set, very, very expensive, next week. It was the most planned space in the world to show that however you approached this was the eternal geometric truth of structure out of which all is made. One of the peculiarities of our time is that the development of power on this planet is unstable on anything less than a terrestrial mankind. But the stability of that is dependent upon a civilization being a larger context than the planetary culture. So that the stability is in terms of a radial symmetry where the planet itself is a part of a harmonic of the whole star system. So that the star system itself becomes the radial, chiral, conscious stability, because its stability is harmonic and resonant with all the other stars. Whatever other stars there are, and whatever constellations that there are, this star system will be in a harmonic relationship with them. We're going to take a little break and come back. This is the way Zarathustra, 4,000 years ago, expressed it in my translation from the Avestan. This is the way of Ahura that shone forth in Vohuman, the good mind. The conscious Savior who in good action is our joy of truth. That promise of enlightenment, prized Mazda, is your threshold. Mazda is the radiance of wisdom and has a feminine connotation to it. But the way in which it developed, and we'll come back to the original menorah, is that Ahura and Mazda pair together in such a perfect tuning, there is only one flame. that occurs out of their tuning. That's a shared presence. Let's take a little break. Let's come right back. We're looking at the way in which we can be released from an impossibility. There is no way in our time to sustain a static equilibrium. It must be dynamic. But the dynamic has a universal quality to it. It is chiral in its movement. It's called handedness. Right-handed, left-handedness. It is chiral. And to balance this out takes not just a meeting at a center point, which would then be the stability of a circle. The meeting has to be a meeting threshold of no dimension or of infinite dimensions that is capable of an exchange. So that the cycle of nature and the ecology of consciousness can exchange. The ancient wisdom saying is they exchange selves. One of the high Dharma classics in the Asian part of the planet is called the Bodhi Tree by Shantideva, written in the late 700s AD. The Bodhicharyavatara is the way that one carries out enlightenment, guarding the bodhisattva helper spirit parayana nature. And he says, Shantideva classically says, the bodhisattvas guard the most mysterious secret, and that is the exchange of selves. My self can operate in your life as your self can operate in my life in an exchange that has a chiral, radiant symmetry to us. And the phrase that I have used in our time for this is shared presence. The origin of shared presence goes back 4,000 years. And the first establishment of it was by about 2000 BC. He established it in such a way that his vision was that there is a special Lord of life, Ahura. And when it first came to him that there were three levels, three registers of energy and dimension of Ahura, but as the vision became more refined, by the time he was 30, he began to appreciate that there is a quality of the Lord of life, that the Lord of life is able, the chiral pivoting of his dimensional more than time-space, dimensions that go into eternity, in such a way that there is an exchange between Ahura and the radiance of with a spirit prism, not the sun, radiance itself. And the word, the name for this, was Mazda. He writes, and this is my translation again, in the 34th yasana, the 14th hat. This indeed is Mazda's light be given, that actual good deed minded is our world's creation's existence. In your grand design, Ahura, a herald truth completes its service. Herald is the power of integrity, not certainty, but the oomph of integrity that occurs like a light wind in one's life, in one's livingness, so that there is a peculiar resonance that is now characteristic of it and is possible for you. That you can share your body of light with someone else's body of light, and you don't lose anything by doing so, but you gain the tuning of the pairing of resonances to further illuminate that there is a harmonic eternally. That your sharing is a participation in eternity. Lao Tzu, in the Tao Te Ching, and the reason for pairing my translations of the Tao Te Ching and my translations of Zarathustra, is that there is a great swath of wisdom running through the Far East into the West, across the Gobi Desert region, into Central Asia, all the way to the Caspian Sea, from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian Sea. And it's a northern inland wisdom that flows in a distinct way and complements the flow of wisdom from Ireland to India. That there are two great weather systems in our planetary history. And that these weather systems are the circulation that has kept our species alive. It's like Benjamin Franklin discovering the Gulf Stream, that there's a huge river in the Atlantic Ocean that carries the warmth up from the Caribbean into the British Isles and Norway and so forth, and allows for life to be there. And in the 20th century of discovering that it doesn't end there, but it circulates back down around and goes around the entire planet, that every ocean has a part of this large, dynamic, planetary pretzel of current that keeps life possible on the planet. Otherwise, the misdistribution of temperature and of conditions, if it were static, life would have died out eons ago. It's the circulation of the light. Here's how Lao Tzu, this section is the 29th of the Tao Te Ching. The title of it is Wu Wei. It means nothing precisely. Surging desire to grab heaven, earth, and busy at it, I see it not obtained. Thereby heaven, earth, divine vessel, not can be busy. Indeed. Busy, one mars it. Grabbing, one loses it. Therefore, of beings, some blaze, others glow. Some breathe warm, other cold. Some strong, others weak. Some carry, others carried. Therefore, spirit gen abandons extrovert and thence, abandons extravagance, abandons indulgence. The quality of Zarathustra's vision came to be that there are 6 great helpers and 2 culminations of those 6 helpers, like we were talking before the break, of the Bhagwa, the trigrams, of how there are possibilities of a movement up the trigrams, the unbroken being on the bottom, the middle or the top, and the broken being in the same 3, but that you can take each one of the movements and put them together in master trigrams, which then become the pure yang and the pure yin. A set of 8 has a peculiar quality to it because it is the cube of the pair. 2 cubed is 8. And once you cube a direction, the square of it will have a harmonic relationship to it. And the harmonic relationship of the cubes and the squares is always that their ratioing will produce a unity. Will produce not just oneness, but any expansion of oneness through the cardinality of numbers, integers, whole integers, and into the ordinality of numbers, that is, the powers that they can be raised to. So that if you are able to coordinate resonantly the tuned ratioability of cubes and squares, you will always be able to find precisely the unity, and whatever expression it is, it will be an integral. It will be complete, capable of being accessed by consciousness, capable of being a part of a larger hand, able then to work with it. And one of the great wisdom sayings in ancient times was that the hand is the cutting edge of the mind. Whatever the hand can do, especially if the hands are paired together, the expansion then of the context of the integral mind into its conscious dimensions extends to the infinite field of vision, extends to the prismatic spirit person, extends also then to the kaleidoscopic consciousness that is actually engendered by history. That history is not a repository of something over and done with, your history, but that history is a 7-dimensional, very high kaleidoscopic consciousness that makes possible the form of the cosmos to emerge harmonically with the prismatic person. So that one is now in actual conscious establishment, a part of an eternal harmonic. That the cosmos as a form emerges as like an 8th dimension, and all of a sudden one realizes that an 8-dimensional complementarity will itself then generate the sense, the presence of reality. And so the ancient wisdom was always something like what is expressed here in Zarathustra. Mazda to me is the best, both by teachings in deed and word. So through our Vohuman and in Asha's yearning praise, your Kshatra Ahura renews fully, bestowing life. One of the aspects that I discovered working for more than 10 years on this translation was that the structure of the Gathas is particular. It has 4 sections. It has the first 7. And then it has a series of pairs of 4s. And then it has a single coda. The first 7 have 6 lines for each one of the little subsections. When you get to the middle 4s, the first 4 has 5 lines for each of the sections. The second 4 have 4 lines for each of the sections. And then the 4th section, the coda, has 3 lines per section. In the very first yasna, there are 11 sections of 6 lines. In the very last, there are 22 sections of 3 lines. They balance out, but they balance out not in an equilibrium, but in a chiral circulation, so that one can go from the 16th yasna in its 3-line version by pairing the 22 back together as an 11, which is like a chiral meeting of the very first yasna, so that the Zarathustrian gathas constitute an infinity sign, quaternary, that is able to carry itself continuously. Zarathustra says of himself, this was the discovery of the man of light, who is able to keep the balance of Asha, the feminine order of the world, balanced with the good mind, the masculine Vohaman. And those two together balance chirally in such a way that Ahura and Mazda together become a single flame. They become the middle candle of a menorah. The two that are joined together between Mazda and Vohaman, between the radiance and the good mind, are Harvatat and Amaritat. Harvatat is like good health in our life, and Amaritat is like eternal immortality. And the way those twins interface is through perfection. If our health is in tune, best it can in this life, it can slide into immortality, not only naturally, but eternally. The other pair that are there is Armati, who is love, and Kshatra, which is the sovereign quality of one's integrity, that they pair as well. And so love and the sovereignty of integrity are tunable also, and they pair with health and immortality, and those pair within the feminine order and the masculine good mind, so that you have 3 pairs brought together, and what would be the 4th pair as a shared presence is a single candle. So that in Zoroastrianism, there were fire temples within which there was a single flame that was lit with 3 pieces of sandalwood with some incense. And the flame from that was the purification. And that purification meant that the Zaotar, the ancient priest, the high priest in Zoroastrianism was called the Dashtur. They wear a mask so as to keep themselves pure before the flame. And it is this Zoroastrian fire that then becomes the ancient symbol of the way in which the central flame ignites by resonance the 6 flames of the holy immortals that are a part of the octave, which can be seen as a 7, a heptad. The ancient Jewish menorah is a direct descendant of the Zoroastrian menorah. So the central synthesizing symbol of Israel is deeply harmonic with the central symbolizing symbol of Iran. And that they should be faced off in a potential nuclear oblivion is a sign of the ignorance of the age. It is the most ridiculous, unnecessary nightmare imaginable, except for one more: higher power. Zarathustra was married in what the Greeks called Bactria, we today call Afghanistan. When he was in his 70s, he published his Gathas, and when he was 77, he was murdered at prayer in what was ancient Balkh, and that today is called Kabul. The United States is involved in Afghanistan again with a worldwide terrorism lurking that slides ever nearer to a nuclear disaster as well. That the United States in Afghanistan and Israel versus Iran is happening all at the same time is an aspect of the way in which historical forms follow a harmonic pattern. And that harmonic pattern is not only a cycle of certainty, it is part of an ecology of release at one and the same time. This work is meant to disclose the mandala of how those two together occur as reality. One of the most peculiar things is that one of the sacred ceremonies of the original Zarathustrian and carried over into the Zoroastrian is a revival at the time of Cyrus the Great in the 500s BC. Those who say that Zarathustra or Zoroaster must have been born 600 BC mistake Zoroaster for Cyrus the Great. He was born in the 590s BC. He established the Persian Empire. He was the one that ended the Jews' exile. He said, you can go home. You can go back to Jerusalem and rebuild it. You can go back to Israel and repopulate it. And so he is venerated in Jewish history as like Lincoln would be in American history. He allowed us to go home from the exile. And Cyrus established a huge empire that went all the way into the Indus river system of India and all the way to the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And his son Cambyses extended the empire down into Egypt. Right about the time that Pythagoras went to study in Egypt. And so Pythagoras studied in Egypt with the priests of Heliopolis at the same time that the Zarathustrian religion was becoming the leaven that opened up the entire empire, so that after 22 years of studying the Egyptian wisdom, he went to Persia and studied the Zoroastrian wisdom for 11 years. And so one has to learn to see that the great prismatic genius of Greek wisdom was masterful at a triad, Egyptian and Persian and Greek wisdom, and that the true center of those three was the home turf of the family of Pythagoras, which was Tyre in Phoenicia. His father, Menesarchus, ran shipping routes because the Phoenicians had established shipping routes at least 500 years before, by 1000 BC. They were able to found Carthage, they were able to found what became Marseille, all of this long before Pythagoras was born. Tyre became the place which changed the vision of Alexander the Great. About 330 BC, Alexander saw that you must, to keep an empire together, do what the Persians had done. You have to have a people who understand the ways in which an inter-kingdom multiplicity, what we would call today an international swath, is able to do business, is able to have a shared common language along with all the other languages. So you have to have people who are multilingual, who are good at business in translating the various currencies, in exchanging the various goods over almost a worldwide swath, so that you can see what is really valuable way over here may not be valuable close by to them, but you can do a wonderful business by running it on this large scale. And Alexander found what Cyrus the Great had found, that the people most capable at doing this were the people with the most experience. The northern Semitic language peoples had been doing this since the time of the Akkadian Empire under Sargon the Great, who founded it about 2350 BC. Now, if you're looking at time forms, you can see it's 2,000 years between Abraham and Jesus. Zarathustra is a contemporary of Abraham. It's 2,000 years from Zarathustra to Jesus as well. But if you go back 350 years before Abraham and Zarathustra, you come back to Sargon. So that there are two cycles that are working in tandem together. They both have 500-year cycles. They both have pairs of that making millennial cycles, and pairs of that making aeonic 2,000-year cycles. So if one looks at Sargon of Akkad, 2,000 years from him later is Alexander the Great. If you look at the millennial figure between Sargon and Alexander the Great, you find Moses. And you find all of the mythic characteristics of Moses are already there in Sargon. For instance, Sargon is abandoned in the Euphrates River in a little woven basket and is found by the royal keeper of the date palms and raises him to be his own son, like Moses is raised by Pharaoh's daughter to be a part of the pharaonic household, etc., etc. So that if you begin to learn that there are staggered cycles of time forms, one can learn to read history. One can learn to read it like one can read the understanding of a landscape is not just the beauty or the horrificness of a landscape. One can learn to look with geological eyes. One can learn to look with ecological eyes. One can learn to really read the book of nature. One can learn to read the book of history. If you take 1,000 years after Alexander the Great, you get Muhammad. It's not in the same line as Abraham and Zarathustra to Jesus and on to our time, but it is in line with the establishment of empires. Sargon, Alexander the Great, Moses, and it turns out that there's an aeon in between Moses and Muhammad. So you begin to see that these formative figures are not only figures, they are prismatic persons of high energy, high ordinal power. And what they do is they create a historical energy, a seventh dimension quality, and the way in which that matures is to develop science out of it. Because science is the appreciation of the cosmic form out of all of those. And so if there is a salvation, the salvation is being able to appreciate why the historical development of scientific forms is not only important and significant, it is the saving grace. If you take the aeon between Sargon and Alexander the Great and extend it another aeon, the figure who is there is Sir Isaac Newton. You begin to understand that consciousness has forms and processes. It has a field, and though it's infinite, it nevertheless operates as a field. It has a flow, but the flow is differential to the point of kaleidoscopicness. So that, as Walt Whitman said, when you look deep enough, Mother Nature seems to favor two things. She likes freedom and variety. So he says in Leaves of Grass, over and over again, I celebrate you for being different from me. Let's talk together. Let's sing together. Let's explore others who are even different from both of us. More next week.